Joining me now, a voice from the other side of this debate. Chris Cox is the executive director of the National Rifle Association's Institute for Legislative Action. He is the NRA's top lobbyist and top political strategist. I want to ask you, Chris, about something we heard Donald Trump say at the top of the show, that if people in that nightclub had been as heavily armed as the shooter, it would have been a better situation. Is that really what you want? Is people late at night drinking at a nightclub 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, armed to the teeth? Is that the recipe for?
Well, Jonathan, here's what we know. What happened in Orlando was heartbreaking. Our prayers go out to those families, everybody impacted. We have a serious problem in this country, a catastrophic situation. It has nothing to do with firearms. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment or even gun control, and it has everything to do with radical Islamic terrorists. Okay, what Donald Trump has said is that the policies of that nightclub, the gun-free zone, did not prevent that terrorist from going in and mowing down innocent people. And we need to have an honest discussion about what works.
But do you want people late at night at a nightclub drinking?
Of course not. Of course not. And you can't be in a nightclub drinking anywhere in this country. What Donald Trump has said is what the American people know is common sense, that if somebody had been there to stop this faster, fewer people would have died. That's not controversial. That's common sense.
Well, you don't like the idea of people going into nightclubs armed to the teeth?
Of course, no one thinks that people should go into a nightclub drinking and carrying firearms. That defies common sense. It also defies the law. It's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is a failure of this government to keep us safe. And the American people are scared, and they have reason to be scared. And you can do both things. You can stop bad things from happening while protecting the rights of law-abiding people to defend themselves.
Now, Donald Trump says he wants to meet with you. Has he reached out yet? Is there a meeting scheduled?
Sure, we have conversations with Mr. Trump and his operation all the time. What Donald Trump has said is something that the National Rifle Association agrees with. The NRA's position is that terrorists should not be able to buy firearms legally or illegally, period.
But what he has said very specifically, because I was very specific with him, and it was not the first time he said it, he has said that it is his position that if you are on the terrorist watch list, you should not be able to buy a firearm. Are you prepared to agree with that?
What our position is that the FBI should investigate every single person who's on a terrorist watch list if they try to buy a gun. That's what they're doing now. If there's a reason to believe and probable cause that they're engaged in terrorist activity, they ought to not only be prevented from getting a firearm, they ought to be arrested. At the same time, the government makes mistakes. The government puts people on the list like Nelson Mandela, Ted Kennedy, an 8-year-old Boy Scout, or Cub Scout rather. Do you think that people should be afforded due process who are on the list by mistake? That's the National Rifle Association position, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can protect the rights of law-abiding people in this country while preventing terrorists from doing bad things. They're not mutually exclusive.
But the bill you guys are supporting, all it would do is it would say that the government has 72 hours to prove the case. You'd basically have to have a trial in 72 hours. If they can't prove the case in 72 hours, that person can go and buy a gun.
What it does is it puts at the top of the docket.
That's not going to work.
Here's what law enforcement's told us, that they don't want to give these guys more than 72 hours because it gives them an opportunity to either go dark or to go out and buy pipe bombs like they did and build pipe bombs like they did in Boston. Again, this notion that more gun control is going to prevent some jihadist who thinks that he's going to obtain martyrdom by murdering innocent people really gets away from the serious nature of the problem that we're facing. We want to make sure that terrorists don't have access to firearms. We also want to make sure that law-abiding Americans have the common sense ability to protect themselves when their government's failing.
So can we get back? One of the weapons that this killer had was this so-called Sig Sauer MCX. This is a military-style assault weapon. We've heard from Seth Moulton, who was 4 tours of duty in Iraq, that there is simply no reason for a civilian to own a military-style assault weapon. So help us understand.
Jonathan, I understand.
Why should ordinary Americans on the streets of our towns and cities have to have a weapon like that?
Tens of millions of Americans own guns for a variety of lawful purposes, but I understand that people, when horrific things happen, want to look at the weapon that was used. They want to look at pipe bombs in Boston. They want to look at firearms in Orlando. But the truth of the matter is those guns were banned in Paris, and it didn't stop that terrorist attack. They were banned in Brussels. They were banned in California, and it didn't stop San Bernardino. The point is, criminals and terrorists are not going to be deterred by one more gun control law when they're willing to walk into a gun-free club and commit murder with a firearm. or with any other weapon. So it's again,
I understand your
get it.
argument that it may not prevent these attacks, that it may not be effective, that it didn't work in
But that's
Paris.
the point of this conversation is how do we prevent the next
But what I'm
one?
asking is just help us understand,
Sure.
why do people need what have been branded weapons of war?
Yeah.
A weapon like that, why are those needed on the streets of America? Why should those be legal?
It's a fair question, and it's fair to say, shouldn't we just try certain things? The truth is that it has been tried. It's been tried. We banned them internationally in Paris, and they still used full autos and hand grenades. We banned them in this country for 10 years. For 10 years, the reason it was allowed to sunset is because an outside study was mandated when they passed the law, and it came back and it said there was no impact on crime from banning these weapons from law-abiding people. Again, the Second Amendment and the rights of law-abiding gun owners in this country is not the underlying problem. The problem is we have a failed policy when it comes to keeping the American people safe. That's what the CIA director said this week. The global spread of ISIS is stronger. We need to confront that problem, not take away the rights of law-abiding people. Those aren't mutually exclusive goals, Jonathan.
You're sitting on a $14 million war chest, campaign war chest. Are you going to use that to go after potentially Republicans if they get wobbly on this issue, if they support any of these bills that you are not supporting?
The truth is, with Justice Scalia's death, there are no longer 5 votes on the Supreme Court for the basic right to keep a gun in your home to defend yourself. Hillary Clinton believes the Supreme Court should overturn that case, believes that there is no individual right. So we're going to use that money to get out and communicate with gun owners across this country and people of like-minded, let them know what's at stake in this election. Will we be involved in Senate races? Absolutely. We'll be involved in races all across the country, and I'm confident that at the end of the day, the American people are going to understand that we have a God-given right to defend ourselves, that firearms are effective means of doing just that, and the politicians who want to just divert attention away from the underlying problems and suggest that we're somehow to blame will pay a price for it.
And we're out of time, but I just want to quickly clarify, if Trump asks you to support the idea of an outright ban on sales for somebody on the no-fly list, on the terrorist list, would you budge on that? Would you change your position on this?
Our position has been the same consistently. We do not think that
so you will not change.
We support Senator Cornyn's approach, which is to ban.
But if he asks, you're not going to change your position on this.
There is not a difference between what Mr. Trump is saying and what the NRA's position is. That's a media-created diversion there.
All right, Chris Cox, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Jonathan.